They put my name on the blacklist. And in fact, for now, I'm wanted under the national security law with around $140,000 bounty. There was a huge and massive protest in Hong Kong. 2 million people marching down to the streets, 1/4 of the population. Many activists' bank accounts are frozen, even without due process. And many organizations, many human rights organizations started to try to cope with that by accepting Bitcoin. Fairly easy to lose freedom when power is unchecked. Putting your guards down was a big strategic mistakes from the West. A lot of damages are done and it's a bit too late.
Could Hong Kong's collapse into tyranny be a dark preview of what's coming to the West? And is Bitcoin a critical tool that could help save the fight for freedom? Meet Nathan Law, Hong Kong's youngest legislator ever, who was imprisoned for staring down China's authoritarian machine and now lives in exile in the UK. His story isn't just inspiring, it's a chilling wake-up call. In this video, we discuss Nathan's unexpected hero's journey, the current state of freedom and democracy in Hong Kong and why it's looking worse than ever, and why Bitcoin is a lifeline for activists all around the world. Stick around to hear from a guy who survived the nightmare, because what's happening there might be closer to home than you think. Going beyond Bitcoin to bring you the skills and insights you need to escape the fiat matrix. This is Mentor Sessions. Well, Nathan Law, thank you so much for joining us today. For those who are unfamiliar, Nathan currently resides in the UK under political asylum. Nathan, can you tell us about how you ended up in such a situation and your involvement in the Hong Kong democracy movement, umbrella movement, liberty movement? We would just love to hear it.
Yeah, great. So first of all, thank you so much for having me, Gary, and also another Nathan. It is a pleasure. For me, the story starts like 10 years ago when I was first a student activist. I was a college freshman, and then throughout my entire life, I wasn't involved in anything about democracy and human rights. Both my parents, they didn't teach me about it. We grew up in one of the most impoverished area in Hong Kong. So they had these I call refugee mentality, which they focuses on making ends meet, putting food on table, and always encourage me not to rock the boat, just like focus on your thing and have a proper job and climb up the social ladder. But it was going through like education on different democracy movement, including the one in mainland China in 1989, the Tiananmen massacre, and many others, that I was also inspired by the people who look like me, who at my similar age, but they are working towards something much greater than themselves. So I decided to get involved in student activism in my college. And when I first joined it, there was a huge, massive civil disobedience movement called Umbrella Movement. And I became a student activist, student leader, was one of the 5 student activists who had a negotiation with the government. And then I became a public figure. So the journey started there, and then I was elected into Hong Kong's legislature at 23, which was the youngest ever person who made that. And I was in jail for my participation in the umbrella movement. In up to 2019, 2020, there was a huge and massive protest in Hong Kong. It was unbelievable. And at the peak of that, there were 2 million people marching down to the streets, which was more than 1/4 of the population in pursuit for freedom and democracy. But it ended up the Chinese government was just way too powerful, and they had so much resources. And then they cracked down the whole movement. They issue a lot of draconian laws that basically criminalize free speech, and any sort of political freedom was gone. And I had to leave Hong Kong. So in 2020, I left Hong Kong and landed in the UK. On the next few days after I left, my name was literally on the wanted list. And then for now, I'm in the UK. I received the political asylum and have also been advocating for the freedom and democracy for Hong Kong and for China as well.
Wow, that's absolutely incredible. Quickly, I just wanted to ask too. The thing that's really striking is, one, I'm empathizing with you being such a young man at the time as well too. So I want to dive into that a little bit later. But I want to quickly expand upon, in 2014, what was the initial kind of kickoff? What was it that sprung up? I imagine there was an event or something that like really got people active and motivated.
I think it's just a long relationship of democracy Hong Kong and the Chinese government. So Hong Kong was originally a British colony, and it's been a colony for 150 years. And in 1997, Hong Kong was handed back from the British government to the Chinese government. And by then, as you can imagine, China was rather like a undeveloped, poor country where they still were much more closed, repressive in terms of its politics, and also its economy was not doing really well. And Hong Kong was already a relatively cosmopolitan and big financial center, and there were so much anxiety and worries about Hong Kong being governed by quote unquote a socialist government, which has completely different political ideology and how they govern the society compared to the Hong Kong people approach. So back then, Hong Kong people were really nervous, and the Chinese government promised Hong Kong people that, look, like I know you're nervous, so we are not going to change a bit of how you live your life. Plus, we promise you that you'll get freedom, democracy, and rule of law when you are under the Chinese governance. So we enter into a framework called One Country, Two System, and we signed the Sino-British Joint Declaration to basically honor those promises. And Hong Kong people were, in fact, they really didn't have a choice. So they had to suck it in, and then it smoothly went through 1997 and up to around 2010, where Hong Kong people were like, oh, wait, like you promised us so many things, but they have not been realized. So Hong Kong people started to become impatient, like asking for the Chinese government to honor their promises. And that basically was the basis of why Hong Kong people emerged in protest and the start of the democratic movement. So up to the 2014, there was actually a political debate on the political reform of how we elect our government and our legislature. So Hong Kong people, they were saying, look, we want direct election. We wanted to be able to elect who lead our city and also all the members of our legislature. And obviously, Beijing refused to comply, and that's the reason why there was a big movement emerged.
I guess I'm wondering when you said that it was turned over to Beijing back in 1997, and obviously back then Beijing, the seat of the Chinese capital, didn't have a huge interest in muddying or rather upsetting the waters at the moment because, as you said, China was relatively poor. At least compared to how they are now. And Hong Kong was this thriving economic powerhouse that I assume they thought at the time, well, it benefits us more to kind of leave them be and let them do what they want to do. But of course, as China has grown economically, I would imagine it makes more sense for the leadership of China to value their own power and making sure that that is not interrupted by protests from Hong Kong. And I would have to imagine that people in Hong Kong would have seen this coming for a very long time. So I wonder why more people didn't leave and why we didn't even see more people trying to get out during the protests.
Yeah, that's a good question. So in the 80s and 90s, there were at least 3 waves of immigration from Hong Kong. One happened after Hong Kong's fate was sealed, so that Hong Kong was about to go back to China. So there was a wave of people leaving. And then it was after the 1989 massacre, Tiananmen massacre, and also just before the handover. So Hong Kong people have been voting by foot. There are lots of people left. And also in the past 3-4 years, by estimation, there have been 300,000 to 400,000 Hong Kong people left.
Okay.
Many of them, they've come to the UK because the UK government offer a humanitarian pathway. So that if you were born before 1997 as a British colonial citizen, things like this, then you are given an opportunity to leave and get citizenship in the UK for 6 years. And then there are similar pathway to Australia, to Canada, and to the US. So I imagine there are actually like a lot of people made the choice leaving Hong Kong in order to just like live freely, because for now it's really politically suppressive. And there are also many people who, even though they had the idea of like trying to enjoy freedom, but they just don't have the capacity, don't have the capital, don't have the like skill set to leave and then to grow their life in another country, and that makes things tricky.
Yeah, I mean, you listen to my subconscious bias here, like, oh, why did they just pick up and go? How hard can it be? Yeah, how hard was it for you?
It's really difficult, I would imagine, if you're not like really fluent in English. If you are in your like way beyond like 20s, 30s, if you are especially having family, you have to start over. There are a lot of things that you have to overcome, no matter the culture, language, livelihood, among many other things. So even though there are so many people left for the past few years, there are of course cases where like they struggle overseas and they need a little bit more extra help. So I would say that I've seen examples where like people who are not fluent in English, they've come over and struggle to get work, struggle to equip themselves with the skill necessary to just thrive in society.
I'm curious then too, even just specifically talking about your case, Nathan, as well too. You did get out, and kind of twofold. I'm wondering if there's anyone that like specifically was looking to get out of Hong Kong. If you had any lessons from that experience that you found valuable or insightful, or even more broadly speaking, if somebody's in a situation, because maybe you were able to just kind of go out the front door, but I imagine with the heat that was on you and where it escalated from there, was it difficult for you personally to actually get out of Hong Kong? And do you have any lessons maybe for other freedom-minded people, freedom activists around the world, that if you need to escape, here's some things that I learned?
It really depends on who you are. In Hong Kong's case, there is still freedom of movement as long as the government doesn't target you. So if you're targeted, then it pretty much, it depends. Like there's a big possibility you may not be able to leave permanently. Maybe they will talk to you and then to grant you like a 5-day visa out of Hong Kong and everything like this. It comes with no like, there are all extra legal restriction. There is law trying to curtail people's freedom, but there's another way of doing business where they just, by sheer power, to intimidate you, to just confiscate your passport, to just say, look, if you left, then your families will suffer. Things like this. So there are many cases where like activists who are active overseas still campaigning for freedom and democracy of Hong Kong and higher, like larger accountability of the Chinese and Hong Kong government over the things that they've done. That their families in Hong Kong are harassed or some arrested. So for me, like it really depends on like whether you know how big of a target you are. If you haven't done things that really pick up the government's attention, pretty much it will be a smooth like transition. But if you are, then from the past experiences, it's just better to figure it out how you can interact with the government and maybe make a move when they are less alarmed. Like for example, you went to vacation for a few times, you come back on time, and then you're secretly planning to just leave permanently, and then you take care of other things like all the ramifications that may come after you left. So it really takes planning to do it.
Well, Nathan, I got to ask, you were part of the student protests, part of a student democracy organization. You were elected to a government position in Hong Kong. And of course, I'm familiar with the oath scandal where you turned it into a question. So I would imagine out of anybody there, Beijing probably had their eyes on you pretty hard. How did you get out? I mean, to my colleague Nathan's point, did you just walk out the front door?
Well, I would say that I was really fortunate. So before the really draconian law, the national security law basically criminalized all actions opposing the government.
Ooh.
Before it was enacted, I managed to leave before that, a few days before that. So I imagine I was just lucky enough to leave before they put my name on the blacklist And in fact, for now, I'm wanted under the national security law with around $140,000 bounty. So anyone who can basically make the case that like make me arrested, that they could claim that bounty for my arrest.
Nathan, I got to say that's pretty impressive. That's got to be a good opening line with the ladies.
Yeah. That's kind of like my asset. If you're bold enough to make a move.
When you left, were you able to take any of your wealth with you?
So I was just like with my backpack and my hand luggage, and I formatted all electronic devices, and I didn't bring much to me because I don't want to look suspicious. And I had like a scenario where if they stop me at a border, if I could not leave, if I arrest me on site, then I have minimal information that they can read from my electronic devices, from either is my kind of like social network or my knowledge on all sorts of things. So it was really a minimal personal belongings with me, and then I flew to London, and that's it. I never looked back.
Okay.
Just incredible. I'm curious then too. So we had the protest kick off again in 2019, if I understand correctly, and I did read that there was some Bitcoin donations going to those people as well too at one point in time, which it's the perfect use case for these sort of scenarios. This tyrannical governments and particularly financial censorship. I'm curious for those that are still residing, that maybe are trying to get things going on the ground there too. Are they experiencing financial censorship? Are they being kicked off the banking systems and stuff at all? So is that being weaponized against the people in Hong Kong, or no, they haven't made those kind of moves yet?
It's definitely a big issue. For example, many activists' bank accounts are frozen, even without proper procedure, without due process. There are worries about that, like the government really canceling people's like financial accounts arbitrarily, and the fact that you, for example, donate money to the humanitarian organizations through those banking system, it also leaves paper track that the government actually, if they have access to those files, they go back and said, oh, at that period of time, you donated that much amount of money, and we're suspecting you are involved in these like criminal activities averting the state. So yeah, it is a true concern, and many organizations, many human rights organizations started to try to cope with that by like accepting accepting Bitcoin and other and other digital assets to for donation. So things like this, like the movement has its own way trying to cope with all these restriction.
No, it's beautiful. I'm curious then too. So correct me if I'm wrong, but are you are still in contact with the people there? Are you still actively involved, or maybe just watching from a distance at this point?
For now, any communication of me with anyone inside of Hong Kong is quite dangerous for them. So I mostly like act in the international stage and communicating with people who are overseas. But of course, I have my way to try to understand things inside and getting information from the people on the ground.
Perfect. Okay, so with what you are able to glean from the information, from what you're currently seeing, I'm wondering what the current state of things between the kind of Hong Kong and Chinese relationships. Have things gotten worse? Have they gotten better? Where are we currently at in this battle?
Things got really bad for now. Compared to like 5 years ago when I left Hong Kong, there are more and more laws rolling out to just making sure the government has the power to eliminate any actions or signs that they think that the kind of democratic movement are coming back. There are many people who are under arrest because of the national security law for just posting content online, saying something. There are lots of speech crimes in Hong Kong now. There was a recent arrest. I think it's like a 22, 23-year-old person that he wrote something online, not inciting violence, not committing violence. He wrote something online about, Hong Kong independence, about the government, and then he's arrested under the law. So there are many cases like this repeating for the past few years, and Hong Kong people are feeling like unsafe to speak up. So you are entering an era where it's just white terror. People don't want to speak up again, and even though they have a lot of opinion on how the government's doing like policy and all sorts of things and politics, but they're not to speak up. So it's a huge problem in Hong Kong.
I don't want you to have to name names, but are you familiar with anybody who has been kind of focused on by Beijing and still managed to escape Hong Kong in the last few years?
As long as so what they would do is, like, as long as you are kind of targeted, they would fabricate a charge and arrest you and confiscate your passport. So basically, there is an overwhelming power for the government without due process. When they arrested you, they can detain your passport unlimited time. So even if you are not convicted, even if you have court case in 2 years, they can still manage to refuse you from leaving legally. And there are ways that you can leave illegally, including on a boat trip to Taiwan. So there were successful cases, but gradually the government also operates in many different ways, try to block that. For example, I've heard those human trafficker, like smugglers, that they get the money, get the people on boats, and turn them to the government.
Oh my god!
And I've heard that more patrols were in place, and many different possible routes were busted. So we're talking about like a few years ago when I heard that. For now, I don't think that is a feasible route anymore, or maybe it has revived. I don't know, but it's fairly, like, just think about Hong Kong's geography. Like, we are the only bordering land is China, and then it's all ocean. Like, the three sides of Hong Kong is ocean, and then you're bordering China. So geographically speaking, it's difficult. It's very difficult to leave illegally, and so you can see that put many Hong Kong activists in a very difficult situation.
Bitcoin gives you back your time, so why not spend it having a blast orange pilling your family and friends with the ultimate Bitcoin board game? Block Hunters is a fast-paced adventure that mirrors how Bitcoin actually works. Anyone from Bitcoin beginner to seasoned hodler can play as one of 10 characters, each highlighting a real-world use case. You'll fill the mempool with transactions, mine like a pro, and fight to fill the block to claim your Bitcoin reward, all while keeping your identity hidden. After all, privacy is important. Block Hunters is a STEM.org authenticated game fostering critical thinking, problem-solving skills, and exploring real-world applications. Turn off the screens and have a 30-minute exciting experience the whole family will enjoy. Remember, Block Hunters isn't just a game. It's your secret weapon to fight misinformation, spark understanding, and lead the charge toward a bright orange future. One play and your friends will be begging to set up a wallet. So what are you waiting for? Grab your copy of Block Hunters today and become the unstoppable Bitcoin evangelist. No preaching required. Head to blockhuntersgame.com by simply scanning the QR code or click the links below. Use promo code BTCMentor for 10% off. Are you still keeping Bitcoin on an exchange? Are you secure in your current Bitcoin setup? Are you confident that your wealth will be safely passed on to your children and their children? Feeling a bit overwhelmed? At Bitcoin Mentor, we've helped hundreds of people level up their security and fast-tracked their Bitcoin understanding. If you find that you simply don't have the time to go through all the tutorials, the books, and the guides, you can book a free strategy session with me, Nathan, or any of our other great mentors at bitcoinmentor.io. Discover how Ben and the entire team at Bitcoin Mentor can help you accelerate your Bitcoin journey. Simply scan the QR code or click the link in the description down below. I know, I don't mean, Nathan, did you have a question? I don't mean to jump in here.
No, go ahead.
I know, according to the turnover agreement back in 1997, when Britain ceded control to Beijing, it was supposed to be 50 years of a one state, two systems policy, and that's supposed to expire in 2047, at which point Beijing gets kind of total control to do what they want. From the outside looking in, it seems that they basically already have all the control that they want, and for all practical purposes, that's it. And I guess from my outside perspective, I don't envision it getting any better anytime soon. Do you see a scenario somehow in the future where this could get better? And if so, what might it take?
For now, I'm quite pessimistic about the prospects of Hong Kong getting better, because back in like 80s, 90s, 97, or even early 2000, there was a need for the Chinese government to show that, they are moving towards modernization. They're trying to be liberal. They're trying to implement factors of democracy. They are also part of the global community. And then there was a big policy change when Xi Jinping took power. And for now, they are really, really confident in going against the liberal system that we treasure. They are really vigilant in terms of trying to fight for global control, and they no longer say that, we want to learn from democracy. Instead, like, they say that, we are very comfortable with the authoritarianism that we have. So Hong Kong becomes less of an example that Beijing has to keep, like, the outlook of like the vibrant democracy, vibrant civil society, and a liberal place. So by not needing that, it's really difficult that Beijing has incentive to install factors of freedom and factors of democracy back to Hong Kong. So for now, I don't envision a route that can bring more of like liberties to Hong Kong near future.
You mentioned that China, I guess, has less incentive to do it now, and they're just kind of steamrolling their way through. I've seen it argued that if this were, say, 25 years ago, America, the UK, all part of the West, would have had much better, I guess, moral footing to say, hey, this is wrong, don't do this. But in many ways, we've kind of enabled authoritarian measures ourselves here in the West. We've supported authoritarian regimes around the world. We've done icky things around the world, to put it lightly. And it seems like many of us, at least Western governments, don't really have a moral high ground to stand on. Never mind the fact that we've spent trillions of dollars in overseas wars, and it's hard to put on economic pressure as well. Do you think that has played a role in Beijing being able to kind of move as fast as they have in kind of getting into Hong Kong and putting their foot down?
Yeah, that's definitely something that I think many human rights activists are also concerned. So we're fighting for some ideals. Like, we're not saying, we wanted to assist certain countries to become greater than the others. We're hoping that countries can serve certain ideals that we all pursue, like democracy, respect to human dignities and basic rights, having a free and fair election, having a strong and robust rule of law that are not submitted to any individual's personal, political, or any personal agenda, things like this. So we've got a list of things that we want all countries to go for, because we believe that that is what we need to have a thriving society and protecting individuals' rights. But obviously, like, for the past few years, the state of that pursuit has been dwindled around the world. We've seen some drawbacks of democracy, and that is definitely alarming and concerning. So the best we can do is to keep our voice heard, to keep the education going, to remind everyone that fairly easy to lose freedoms when power is unchecked, and if you're not, if you're not cautious enough in what they're doing. So I think this is one of the lessons that Hong Kong people can tell the world.
No, that's beautiful, and I agree. I'm curious. I'm kind of on that same topic. What I'm going through my head is this idea that, like, I'm wondering, as someone who escaped this kind of tyrannical system, that escaped from basically political persecution for fighting for democracy and for freedom, to try and have that sort of liberal ideals. I'm wondering if any of the things that you're seeing in the Western countries are concerning to you, that we might be going down potentially a bad path. So I think of online censorship is definitely a topic of recurring in both the UK, and I see it in Canada and the US as well too. Kind of putting on pressures, or at least limits in some way or fashion on freedom of speech. So two questions there actually is, one, I'm wondering if anything you're seeing from the Western world, especially from your vantage point, is concerning that we might be going in the wrong direction. And the second question I want to ask too is kind of going back, was there any sort of opportunity or mistakes made earlier on that you think would have put Hong Kong in a better situation? And even just for example, like I find myself wondering, is like, okay, with the ability, with the relationship with the UK for a lot of people to get out, I wonder if in that sort of sense, unfortunately had the negative consequence of the most freedom-minded people who were willing to take action ended up leaving early on rather than being there and available to fight because it was a low barrier to get to somewhere like Canada or the UK.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would like to address the second question first. I think many people left. On the one hand, of course, is because the suppression has surpassed their enduring capacity. But the other reason, like, which is the major reasons why many people leave, is the next generations. Most Hong Kong people who left are with young kids, and the education in Hong Kong was so brainwashing now that basically the way that they teach you about the Chinese Communist Party and Chinese government is like their greatest ever, and you have to obey them because they are your kind of like quote unquote masters. That you have to learn their way and you have to be grateful to them. This is the level that they're instilling.
Yeah, could you expand upon that a little bit more? Because I'm sorry, you hit on something that I think is absolutely incredibly important. For me, from like the liberty aspect, I very much so view that unless we can wrestle control of education back away from the state, if they get them young, like that's an incredibly powerful. I'm wondering maybe you can give us a little more detail or examples of like when this switch happened. What is the Chinese government doing to indoctrinate the kids in order to be subservient or at least okay with the current situation?
Yeah, so after the protest, the government started to look into the education sector and started to think about, there were so many students came out protest, and there were so many like really influential student leaders. There must be something going on in the education system. So I think in 2-3 years ago, they did a reform. They started to abolish liberal studies, which it encourages kids to have critical thinking. And there's a public exam, so you have to take the exam. You have to make cases for both sides on different social issues, and they teach you like concepts about freedom, about democracy, about all sorts of things that you talk about on TV, and they abolish that. Instead, they make into the curriculum about natural education, and the goal is to kind of consolidate the national identity about like how proud to be a Chinese, and learning about the current status of the country and its history, and learning a very sugar-coated version of the history that is about the current regime, and make sure you are grateful to the state and to the regime. So there are many factors that are making into our education that makes families, like makes parents, they're so nervous that they feel like that they had to leave. So this is one of the biggest reasons why Hong Kong people left.
Is government school attendance mandatory in Hong Kong? Like, are kids required to go to the government schools?
They are they're mandated to go to schools. You can go to private one or government one, but they have to go to schools. Homeschooling extremely difficult, if not possible.
And I assume there's pressure on the private schools to teach a certain history of Beijing and the Communist Party of China.
Yeah, basically the political pressure put on private schools and public schools are equally huge.
Gotcha.
So they have to comply and certain version of history and understanding about current politics to the kids.
Yeah, I'm guessing they just don't bring it up, but my immediate thought was, how do they address Tiananmen Square? And my guess is that they probably just don't. Yeah.
What are you talking about? I never
Yeah.
heard of that.
Yeah,
What?
yeah, no. I have teachers like who we are friends told me that they dare not to teach anything about it. Like
Of
in my
course, right.
when I was in high school, it was like 14, 13 years ago. Like my teachers talk about that, and my school was actually quite a kind of like pro Beijing one, and they could do it. Uh, but for now, even the most liberal school, they dare not to talk about it.
They dare not make that move. You touched on something, so I want to jump back and expand some of those earlier points as well too. But you touched on something, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts on it. You mentioned that they teach them how great it is, I think, to be Chinese. And what came to mind there was the identity that I wonder if they're trying to enforce not a, I wonder, one, do people view themselves as Hong Kong or part of Greater China? And because I would think that that would be a major issue for basically stability if China wants to get control of the region. That the first thing they have to do is kind of absorb it in the sense that no,
Yeah.
you're not Hong Kong, you're China, and push that identity onto the population. I'm curious if that's something that you very much saw or see as well too.
Yeah, that's a spot on observation. So in Hong Kong, we use the identity as an indicator of uh, citizens' approval to the Chinese regime. So the more people who only see themselves as Hong Konger, the less approved the Chinese government and their governance in Hong Kong people's eyes. And in the past years, it has been a steady trend where like more and more people identify themselves only as Hong Konger, and then like Hong Kong Chinese, big part of them, like big part of the population identify either like Hong Kong or Hong Kong Chinese, and then there are just like handful of people identifying themselves as Chinese only. So that really reflects that it's a strong local identity, and the kind of strong culture, strong history, strong identity rallying around in the city, and that really makes the government, like the Chinese government, nervous about it. So indoctrinating Hong Kong people to just see themselves as Chinese instead of Hong Konger is a big political project ongoing for the Chinese government.
That's very interesting. No, that's, yeah, it seems to be a recurring theme, like very, very subtle, but even in Alberta right now, too, we have a little bit of tensions with Greater Canada. And you're seeing the same sort of thing where people are identifying as Albertan, not identifying necessarily as Canadian. And that's a way of both kind of showing their displeasure and almost a tip of the hat looking for like minded people that are concerned about maybe the way things are going there as well, too. So jumping back to one of the earlier questions that I had, on that note too, and there may not have been anything. So I'm well aware that we're talking about basically a tiny region that is basically dominated by the UK, and then going over to China. You have two major nations negotiating at that point of time. There very well may have been nothing that could have been done. But in your estimation, if you had a second opportunity, a second kick at the can for this sort of thing while still being there, were there any obvious mistakes or things that could have been improved upon that maybe could have put Hong Kong in a better situation than it is currently today, and from what I hear, getting worse?
Yeah, so there are lots of unfrozen documents documenting the negotiation process in the 80s, from the UK government's point of view. And the UK government actually offered a lot of options, including like you have the transfer of sovereignty, but the UK government keep the governance, etc., to try to just like to stabilize the situation and try to make sure Hong Kong people's liberties are not taken away. The only response from the Chinese government is like, if you don't listen to us, we'll roll in tanks. So
Okay, yeah,
That's what it all comes down
Yeah.
to.
it's the man with the gun, just violence at the end of the day.
Yeah.
yeah, it's really brutal and straightforward. If you look at the documents. So I would say that there was some attempts from the UK government to try to make a better deal, but as the UK government was already retreating from colonial history, and also they are just like focusing on their domestic affairs, they didn't really put much pressure once they get these intimidation from the Chinese government. Of course, like I would imagine that if they can expand their program, like for example, allowing more Hong Kong people to have UK national citizenships so that they can live at their own will, that may create more pressure to the Chinese government to do better. But I think that was indeed a very difficult sell and difficult task for the UK government to do things, as it's just so far away and they don't really have like good influence over the region. One of the biggest mistake that I felt, that I still think, is not just about the UK, but about the decisions of making China as part of WTO without much enforcement on their malpractices. They've been breaching over all these rules, and there are no mechanism trying to hold them accountable. And the fact that the West had an overwhelming wishful thinking about China would go on the classic modernizational path, which means that if it gets wealthy, more middle class, the middle class asked for rights of private property, and then there were more compliance from the government, and the democracy and individual rights emerged because of the growing middle class. And that completely failed in China's context. And if we kind of have more sophisticated understanding in China's politics, when like it was first discussed in early 2000 or 2010, you pretty much see that coming, because they have a very particular political system, and the things that you're feeding them entrench their power instead of empowering the people to ask for more rights. So I think putting your guards down, feeling like you pour money in China that they would just grow democracy, was a big strategic mistakes from the West. And like gradually in recent few years, we've seen more awakening on that, but probably a lot of damage, a lot of damages are done, and is a bit too late.
Yeah, that was the old Milton Friedman hypothesis. You know, you kind of
Yeah.
let economic liberty take hold, people get wealthier, and they have less tolerance for government tyranny. But that doesn't always seem to be the case.
No, yeah, it's definitely not in China.
Do you think? I'm curious. There's one thing I wanted to touch on quickly as well too, because even the idea that like maybe it could have been so much better even if they were granted UK citizenship, because again, you're right. At the end of the day, it all comes down to the man with the gun, the tanks that can roll in. Can you actually defend if need be? Can you actually engage in power projection or violence to do so? But had the Hong Kongers had UK citizenship, that anything the Chinese government would have been doing could have also been basically targeting an international citizen. Like there may have been much more blowback because they're actually doing it to a UK citizen, which could have maybe kept them in better check for a longer period of time. I'm curious then, even regarding the modernization, because I generally would assume that like as the wealth grows, people are going to have more, as they're moving up the Maslow hierarchy of needs, as base needs are more better satisfied, we're going to go to different sort of levels. Is there something was it purely just the infrastructure and totalitarian control that was already in play, or was there something else that you think that idea of middle class to liberal modernization didn't play out in China? Was there something particularly unique to China that wasn't going to be the case?
I think there are lots of factors influencing that. One of them is just how much political instability and turmoil the country as a whole has gone through. Especially in 60s and 70s, like the Cultural Revolution, the big leap forward, it really impoverished the whole country, and everyone was living in high level of poverty, and when you just like gradually increase the quality of life, and you kind of indoctrinate the idea that like the Chinese Communist Party is like the one and only legitimate source of power, and then when people feel like, oh, they lift the whole country up from all these extreme poverty, given that it actually was the cause for that, but they don't talk about it. There was a huge validation to the regime, even up until now, and the vast network of the state apparatus purely built for just sustaining power, and also the ability for them to manipulate discourse, manipulate power, manipulate organization, like everything combined makes the regime is incredibly stable. And once you are hands-on and saying that, oh, you can just like work out your resources wherever you want, put any kind of like conditions or any guardrails on how you develop your country. Like it is almost for certain when there is like economically economic benefit to the country, it will immediately turn into the Chinese government's favor, and they can develop so many tools to just keep their power untouchable. So I think yeah, there are lots of reasons why it kind of evolved as a even like stronger authoritarian countries when there are more and more resources and people, even though people are getting wealthier, that may not change the fact that the government is in total control.
No, absolutely. And one thing that I kind of thought about too as you were going through that, and just remembering the history in the years prior, is it almost seems like it was potentially a traumatized population coming into it, leaving them very susceptible to kind of that at least the thought of a benevolent leader and benevolent teams taking care of things that would make them okay with it. The classic trade safety for security, right?
Yeah,
for
like
freedom.
liberty for
Thank
security.
you. Hey, liberty for
Yeah.
security. Thank you, Gary.
The way that some academics say like portray it is like the Chinese people just signed a tacit social contract with the government. As long as you grow the economy, we can trade it with our liberties. So when that tacit social contract is broken, which it could come because of the economic downturn in mainland China, how would that end up be? That is an open-ended question.
Oh, that's the old pitchfork metric we were talking about the other day on a previous podcast.
Yeah.
How bad do things have to get before the people start taking out the pitchforks and going
Yeah.
after the people in power? Well, this is a Bitcoin podcast. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention when we first invited you on, you said that you weren't particularly a big Bitcoiner necessarily. I don't know if that changed in the few weeks interim that we've had since, but it did make me wonder, given the situation in Hong Kong. We often in the Bitcoin space will talk about Bitcoin as freedom money because it's uncensorable. You can send it to anybody and nobody can stop it. I do wonder, and maybe it's greater than I imagine, but why it's not why hasn't flourished more in Hong Kong than, from what I understand, it has. Do you have any idea why that's the case?
Yeah, from a layperson's point of view, I think there are, like, first of all, I think many Bitcoiners they just have no interest in like going into the city and just grow their business with the government. So there were a lot of stories coming out from the government that they wanted to build Hong Kong as like a Web3 center, like some tech policy, but I don't think there are many people picking that up, just because of how precarious China's policy to Bitcoin and to the whole industry. Like one day they could ban it, and the other day they could have like limited flow of it, and then someday they were having different ideas about it. So I think like the how precarious the whole situation is affect that, like I think the how the industry perceive the place. But of course, like I'm not from the industry. From a lay person point of view, I think there are many news stories broke out in Hong Kong that portray these assets as like a scam. Like I think that there was like a lot of scammers like really tarnishing the whole reputation of Bitcoin and many other coins, and that really creates like basically like like feeling like that was almost like, apart from like a high risk investment tool and things like some people can scam you off, like people don't associate it with something else. And I think that is like a cultural problem. There are a lot of bad actors, especially in Hong Kong. I'm not sure whether that is the same context in some other places, where like you've got these tools that are so decentralized and that they're great in terms of evading government's censorship and surveillance, but there are some bad actors taking advantage of it and then to create a bad name of it. So it creates a certain cultural hurdle for normal people to go into the industry and try to understand a little bit more. So that is like the general atmosphere that I can feel from a person who operates not in the industry but just like living their daily life.
It's so interesting too. I feel like it's a double-edged sword to the number go up aspect of it, because you're right. Like for us, it's very strictly Bitcoin only, and view everything else as a scam.
Yeah,
Everything
yeah.
else is a scam. And there's a ton of scammers in the Bitcoin space as well too, because it's a final settlement bearer instrument. So if you can trick somebody into handing it over, you're going to leave them potentially in a bad position. And I guess that, you know, often a lot of times it's number go up, right? You see price moving, and that's what get people excited, and then they come into the space, and then they will hopefully stay for the freedom go up aspect, right? They'll stay for the anti-censorship, for the self-sovereignty, for the liberty, and everything that's associated with it as well too. But the flip side of that being is that if they see the crash, it's kind of the opposite effect. The number might be bringing them in, it might be also scaring them off, and it's unfortunate. And then hopefully there's people on the ground there that are involved or can be more involved as well too. Because even here in Canada, I wrote down earlier in the conversation as well too, talking about freezing bank accounts, right? And you think about that as something as it like happens, in China's clamping down. We had the bank accounts in Canada frozen during our protest back in 2022. Yes, they were freezing. We had protesters that were going to the capital in Canada in order to protest the COVID lockdown mandates and everything that was going on there. And so, there was a ton of donations, and people that were it was not only people that were actively involved in the protest, but also individuals that were donating to the protest. The Canadian government shut them down and froze their bank accounts. And interestingly enough, I was giving a talk on this not too long ago, but there was, if I remember correctly, $12 million were donated to the Canadian protests through GoFundMe. GoFundMe said, nope, we're not giving that money. They basically seized the money and they never handed it over. Originally said that they were going to give it to other worthy causes, but under threat of litigation, they just refunded the individual donors. So then another one, it was Give, Send, Go, raised, I believe, $13.1 million to donate to the Canadian truckers, to the freedom protests here. And surely enough, they said, no, we're not to judge. We're going to give the money to its intended recipients. As soon as the money crossed into Canada, hit a Canadian bank, just frozen, just done, right? So neither of those got there. It was only Bitcoin. There was $1.2 million in Bitcoin donations. It was the only digital payments mechanism where the money actually got to the intended recipients. But to your point, there's so much noise in the space. There's so much distractions. It's a new concept, right? I don't know where I picked this up, but I often say that it's everything that you don't know about computer science combined with everything that you don't know about money, right? It's a big learning curve. It's not that complex, but there's a lot of moving pieces, and it scares a lot of people off, unfortunately, from those that might actually be able to use and utilize it most. I'll even just share another story without doxing them. I have a friend who was living in China during COVID. And things were getting worse, and he had a Canadian citizenship, and so he was looking to get out and take his family out. If it wasn't for Bitcoin, I hope he listens, he knows who he is. If it wasn't for Bitcoin, he would have been completely screwed. He had a business, he had money and wealth there as well too. He was able to take the entirety basically of his net worth with his family in his carry-on bag in the overhead compartment and get out of China with it intact. And I think that anti-censorship power is something that, particularly like for people like yourself, for those that are still in Hong Kong and fighting for this, that I want them to know about it. I want to know that it's money that no one can stop you from sending and that no one can seize from you. Doesn't mean they can't make your life difficult. There was 6102 gold seizure in the US. Doesn't mean they can't try, but it is another tool that the Human Rights Foundation is using, and then hopefully more freedom activists will get involved with as well too. Gary, or Nathan, Jeff, what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think Human Rights Foundation is a very active actor in promoting financial freedom and the use of Bitcoin among, like, of course, some other cryptocurrencies. Like there definitely debates in like which serve what purpose. But I think Bitcoin is definitely a big thing in the discussion. But as you said, there is relatively high technical bar for people to use it, especially because not because it is technical, but because it is a new concept, and the concept associated some bad actors. So I think there are lots of like advocacy work that we have to do to just like to talk about it. Even for me, like one of the humanitarian foundations that I'm working with, the Bottom Tree Aid, which they provide cash aid to political prisoners' families to let them to pay for their travel to visit the inmates, and also buying like daily supplies to them, etc. They take cryptos and mostly bitcoins as donations. Like it is they also offer ways to pay in cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin. But I don't think there are many people picking that up, even there in Hong Kong. So definitely it's not a problem of the Bitcoin itself. It's not a problem of whether it's safe or whether it is useful, etc. There is a huge cultural hurdle and advocacy that we have to do to make sure people understand. Of course, a bit of technical side of it, but also like how important it is when you're living in an authoritarian regime. So yeah, that is a big, I think, is a big challenge. But I think having that freedom back is really important.
Completely agree. Gary, give me 1 second, and I promise I'll stop hogging the mic. Because
Yeah, no
the
problem,
other thing
man.
that I thought was very interesting, and Nathan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, or if it doesn't apply to Hong Kong necessarily as well too. But I was curious the other day, so I was actually looking into which country is the largest holder of like retail gold, like jewelry. And my assumption was that I thought it would be India. I thought India would be the biggest retail buyer of gold, but I was wrong. At least from the information I'm seeing, is that it was China. And so that leads me to think that hopefully it applies to Hong Kong as well too. But it's at least a demographic of people that are familiar with the arguments for sound money, and that might be under different circumstances might be primed to receive that message. I'm just curious if that's even something that you've seen in your time as well too. Is that people are aware of kind of currency debasement and sound money? If that's something that's on their radar?
Um, so that is a very real use of gold, which when people get married, they send like I think they will buy tons of gold and then to get it as like a gift when they're getting married. So like I think that has a big part of why like there's a lot of gold in use. It's not just like for investment or like just another form of currency. So yeah, I mean I think as far as I know, there's still some education and advocacy work needed in that space to just make people rethink about what is money, like what is a currency, and does it does it mean that you can, oh, the only thing that matters is like whether you can find an ice cream on the street, or you
Yeah.
can like things like this. So yeah, definitely that and I think like to be honest, this is an uphill battle, because sometimes like uh you, some bad actors tarnish that reputation, and it's difficult to build back. Um, but I think it's a fight worth fighting. So I'm also closely paying attention to Human Rights Foundation's work in that space. I've joined some of their panels, listening to some user case like in Philippines, in Nigeria, and many other protesters. They have a good user case, and there are some cool projects which which are ongoing, including I've heard about like a mine like a mining project where they built in a remote area in I think Southern Africa, and then they
Yeah,
actually built
gridless.
like build the grid, and then to help those people to get them some jobs, but also getting power stable to them. Like many other cool projects that are ongoing and doing good things to the humanities that are noticed. I think if those things becomes more apparent, and more talks about it, more hypes about it, I think the idea of Bitcoin not only just like an investment tool, which I think many people who are in possession of Bitcoin do feel like it is an investment tool, but it is actually actually a liberating tool, and a tool they can do good to humanity. And it, like if there isn't like an overwhelming understanding of the for the later to like a tool that can liberate and the tool that can do good to humanities, and if the mainstream discussion is just about well, would it hit like 200,000 next year?
Yeah, price go up. That's it.
Yeah, it's. I mean, like it's difficult for people to see it in different ways. That's just my observation.
No, that's a wonderful point, and I'm so glad to hear that you've been paying attention to the Human Rights Foundation as well too. That warms my heart. I do have a couple more questions, but I've been hogging the mic. Gary, is there anything that you want to ask Nathan right now?
I did have a question, but if you have like a pertinent follow up right now, if you want to hit it, go ahead, man.
No, you go for it, and I'll jump back in.
I'm going to steal your question, which you kind of came up with before we got on the podcast. And forgive me, my audio went out for about 5 minutes earlier. So if you guys already covered this, please tell me. But a lot of people live under tyranny. A lot of people in Hong Kong lived under tyranny. And yet you are one of the people that decided to make a stand. You are one of the people that decided to put your life and your reputation on the line. There's that quote, which is often attributed to Edmund Burke: the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And you tried to do something. Why you? What made you, out of other people, decide you were going to take a stand on this and you're going to put a lot on the line for it? Why? Why you?
Yeah. I think many Hong Kong people also did make a stand. The largest protest we have over 2 million people, so many Hong Kong people try to come out and protest against tyranny. But for me, I think there are lots of unexpected turns of life that made me really deep in the social movement. For example, when I was a college freshman, I went for the election of the head of the student union. And at that time, I was just feeling like, it would be a 1-year thing. And after that, I will learn some guitar, learn some other languages, like going to exchange and fix my grade, things like this. But eventually, like that year, collide with one of the biggest civil disobedience movement in Asia, and the protests exploded, and people were looking into student leadership, and that was the reason why I became a public figure. And then there were many other incidents. So I would say that I made my choice, and the time pretty much picked me to become who I am. And I've wrote a book. The name is called like Freedom: How We Lose It and How We Fight Back. And there's another there's also an Emmy-nominated documentary about my life. Who is Afraid of Nathan Law? And they kind of like depict the path that I've chosen in a way to look into it with like a reluctant hero. Kind of. Yes, like I tried to do something, but I actually wasn't prepared for that. It was because the time changes. It was because in that era there were some seats that people have to fill in, and I happened to be there with the certain capacity and skill set, etc. And I think I've been through really like meaningful life, and for me, like I couldn't have imagined where I am like 15 years ago when I was a kid, or when I was studying high school. Yeah, I don't know why me. Maybe it's just because of the time, and maybe it's just because I just keep going, even though things are turning really bad.
Fair, totally fair point. Yeah, man. Nathan, did you want to jump in with yours? Because I'm happy to follow up if you have something you want to jam
No, go for
on.
the follow up. I'm going to leave mine.
I assume it's not even a great follow up, but I assume it's safe to say that if you had to do it over again, would you do anything different?
Yeah, so I will approach that questions like in the Avengers, like Doctor Strange would envision like 5, like I think it's at the end game.
Yeah. It's like 14 million different scenarios.
Yeah.
Only one of them.
Many different scenario, and like if I do the same practice, I would still consider the life that I'm having is the most meaningful one. Of course, it's definitely one of the most difficult, one of the most turbulent, and you have a lot of setbacks. People don't like you, people like you, ups and downs, etc. But I think like there are many things you can avoid in life. Like suffering is one of them. Putting hard work is one of them. You can never just go for happiness. There are lots of things that comes with the cost. And I think the best indicator of how life is like whether you create meaning. And for me, like this is the meaningful life that I've experienced. And I of course, like there are lots of things that I don't feel like I did perfectly. Like for example, when I was young, I led a legislative office with 15 staff, and I wasn't able to be the best line manager. I wasn't able to be the best person who listened to everyone's concern and trying to make their potentials grow. Like to like there are lots of things I could have done better, but I think it's just
You could have bought Bitcoin. I'm just saying.
wow, that is absolutely true. Like if I could have like learned it in 2016 when I got my first paycheck as a legislator and I put it all in, like that lots of things. But I think at every stage of my life I was just trying to be the best of who I am with the information that I had and the best judgment that I had. Like there's one thing that I felt uncomfortable like talking about past decisions. It was we're always looking at like retrospect. Like you know what the consequences are. You know what happened afterwards. You know all the information that you didn't have when you made that decision, and that really like put people in a very difficult spot. Like there's you can always make better decisions with more information and know like what are the aftermaths of your decisions, right? But for me, like every time I think about it, I always just feel like done my best with the information that I had, and most of the time I follow my consciousness. I follow my ideals that guided me through, and that's the best that I can do.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think you make a great point how important living a meaningful life is. I mean, it is to me to some degree, and I think it is for many people, maybe not all people, but happiness is fleeting. You know, you get an ice cream or, you know, go on a fun ride or watch a movie. And it's nice for a little bit, but living a meaningful life, that's something, even if it comes with a little bit of pain. So, you know, good on you. Congratulations, man.
Beautiful. So Nathan, before we wrap things up here as well, too, we got a little bit of time left here. I want to ask first and foremost, for anyone that very much so empathizes with the people in Hong Kong and wants to help, is there anything that international donors, supporters, what should they be doing? How can they help people in this situation to maybe stop it from getting worse?
Yeah, I'm a part of the organization called Boham Tree Aid that, as I said, they have cash aid to political prisoners and their families. So this is the most direct help that we can offer to just help them go through all these things. On top of that, just pay attention to what's happening in Hong Kong and also China. And I think there are lots of campaigns around trying to put more accountability to Hong Kong and China. And those are the things that we should care about.
Beautiful. Thank you. And lastly, where can people go to find your book, your work? Give us all the information.
The documentary as well.
The documentary, yes.
Yeah. So my book is on Amazon and all the major bookstores. It's called Freedom, How We Lose It and How We Fight Back. And the documentary is on PBS and it's also on Amazon. You can rent it or buy it. And it's nominated for, I think, best political documentary at Emmy Awards. So in June I will know whether it'll win the prize. But I'm incredibly proud of the team and the results of it.
Beautiful.
Cool,
and
man.
Twitter or social media, anywhere else?
Yeah, Nathan Law KC. You can get it on all social media except TikTok.
If you enjoyed this episode with Nathan Law, please do like and subscribe, and check out the previous episode with Lenore Skenazy on raising freedom-focused kids.